Happy Wine Wednesday, everyone. Hope you're having a fabulous week. Hope your tanks are doing fabulous. I'm personally got my plastic Seahorse cup so that we don't break anymore. But I'm sipping on Chardonnay in my little I don't know if you guys can even see the Seahorse, can you?
I can see it. Yeah, it's cute.
I actually painted that on myself. So it's just a
It's
plastic cup, but
cool.
it's my new Seahorse cup. I'm sipping on Chardonnay. Let me know what you're sipping on in the comments. Just got back from my daughter's birthday dinner. We were discussing before we went live how many birthdays there have been this month. It's just been crazy. If you guys missed last week, we celebrated Dandy's birthday and Ray's birthday. I did ship out the plaque too, Ray. So let us know when you get it. We want to see you, have
Okay.
it. But besides that, tonight is just open chat. I had just a huge dinner, so I'm stuffed and ready for bed. So if you guys got to bring the questions to keep me lively and keep me going. But that being said, I've got Holly and Ray with me. I see we've got Professor Fish Tanks and Salty Reef. How you guys doing tonight? I do see a few others, but I'm not seeing the names yet. So if I don't say hi, I'm sorry. Hello. Glad to have all of you. I don't often see who's watching from Facebook too, unless you say something. I don't see you. So, but I'm glad you're here either way. And hopefully, I feel like we had some questions last week that we didn't get to, but of course, I don't have them up in front of me, so I don't remember them. So if you did ask a question and we haven't answered it, let me know. Final thing is, if anybody knows anything about AirPod Pros, okay, this is totally off the topic of tanks, but it's a serious question. I have never had like the time to sit and figure this out. So I'm just throwing it out there in case somebody knows. So I got AirPod Pros, right? They were off of eBay. I will say that out of the blue. So, there may just be something wrong with them, but they came in the box, in the plastic wrap. I think they're probably knockoffs, whatever. They work perfect for listening, to something on my phone. But I can't answer the phone with them. Like something's not jiving. And when I try to use them for this podcast or for this Wine Wednesday, they don't work. They keep glitching out and it doesn't work. So I don't know if there's some setting I have to set. I've never had Pros before. So anyways, if you guys have AirPod Pros and you can tell me what I'm doing wrong, I'm game to learn. If not, I'll have to figure it out before next week because the reason I'm telling you guys all this is that if you hear things in the background, I apologize. It's because I'm not using AirPods this week. So everybody in the house is privy to our Wine Wednesday. That's okay, though. It's all good. Just if there's any background noise, I apologize. All right, I'm done rambling. Let me know how you guys are doing in the comments. Holly, you got anything new for us this week? What's going on with you?
Not really. Just a typical water change Wednesday. Dandy was holding a grudge with me though. He didn't eat after I cleaned the tank. I had to move him a couple of times, pick him up and kind of hurry him along to the other side of the tank because he kept going to his favorite corner, which I was trying to clean. And I had moved his hitch to the other side. So there was nothing there, but still he wanted to go over there and throw a tantrum. So I had to escort him to the other side of the tank like 3 times. And
Are you sure
then,
it's a male?
what's that?
Are you sure it's a male?
Oh, yes. They're high maintenance too, Ray. So anyway, everything though went well. I put the new water in and I had to move him before that too because I don't want to pour the water right on top of them, So anyway, I had to move him a few times and then finally everything's put back together. I got finished really early today. So everything was done and settled in time for lunch. And I served lunch and he didn't want to eat. And he was sitting there next to his dish, but facing the wall the other way. And he has this little dragon decoration that he hitches on, and it's kind of long and narrow. So it's like a pole. And so anyway, dinner comes around and I feed dinner and he still is not interested in eating. And I'm like, well, what's going on with you, Dandy? But then, I showed him on the outside of the tank the turkey baster with the food, and I saw him looking at it
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, food. And I'm like,
Right.
come on, you're going to eat. I put the food in his dish and waited. And, a few minutes later, Sadie's eating her meal. He's still not eating. And so I reached in and I turned around the pole that he was sitting on so that his face was in front of the dish,
Yeah.
and he starts eating.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, here you just figured because I moved him
Yeah.
so many times across the tank that I could just move him to his food for him to eat. So he's getting even
He could get you to do what he wants.
yeah, so he's getting even more spoiled today.
Wow. Well, hey, I guess it is.
Hopefully he forgets all that by the morning so that I don't have to move him to his food every time.
And if Cheryl was here, she would tell it. Cheryl or Dan would tell you, tough love. He's gonna.
Yeah.
But you got time, and you don't care if your seahorses are spoiled. It is what it is. I mean, yeah, and I would say, actually, I was wondering when you were talking, because I've noticed my seahorses, they're not pouty like you're talking about. They're not like stubborn, but I've always wondered, and I've always felt like right after a water change, they're uncomfortable. Is that a good
They're
way?
unsettled sometimes. Like, I don't always feed lunch on the days that I do the water change because they're not ready to eat yet. Like, they need to settle down and calm down. But
Right.
I finished the water change super early today. I finished at 8:30 in the morning, and
Gotcha.
lunch is at noon.
Gotcha.
So they had, some hours in between. So
Right.
I'm like, okay, they should be ready to eat. And Sadie was, she came and ate her food. And Dandy was sitting, like I said, right at his dish, hitched to the place where he hitches to eat, but he was just facing the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you idiot. And he does that often, but he usually spins himself around, right? And comes to the dish. And he just wasn't doing that today. So finally I did it for him. I grabbed the thing and I turned it around, and he's like, okay, now I'll eat. And I'm like, was that it? You're just waiting for me to move you because I moved you earlier today. So you're like, oh, Mom can move me.
At least you got it figured out. I would say too, just kind of like along this lines, guys, it's open chat. So I see you, RG Reef. Hello. Anybody who has a question about seahorses or tanks, if you don't ask questions, we're just going to sit here and talk. That's it. Answering a question, but if we don't have the question, that's what we do. So anyways, I was going to say, I noticed something interesting today, and I would love all of your feedback on it. So, we've talked about, we usually keep seahorses at, like, what salinity do you keep your tank at, Holly?
Mine generally runs 1.021.
Okay. Ray, is that about what you kept it at?
I guess probably the first decade I was running 1.026.
Okay.
And the last half I was running 2.4.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Did you notice any difference in breeding based on salinity?
No, I tried that when I had a pair of reed-eye that didn't want to breed. So I tried different things. And the first thing I tried was to change the salinity. Okay. And first of all, I brought it up gradually. And then when that didn't work after a month or so, then I brought it down lower. And you can lower fairly fast. You just don't want to go up fast.
Right.
But even at the lower stage, it didn't work then. So then I tried lighting and a few other things, but that particular pair I never ever did get to breed.
Which is, hey, Link, which is frustrating to hear for me because, we all know sometimes you just get a pair that doesn't breed. They just don't for whatever reason. There's nothing, nothing's going to work. I still haven't given up hope on mine because I have 2 seahorses from Vincent, and his seahorses breed all over the place. And I've often thought that maybe it's, we've talked about this endlessly, you know, maybe I'm not doing big enough water changes, the water's not clean enough. Maybe it's because the tank's smaller, it's an all-in-one tank, so no sump and that kind of thing. Could be just the water quality, could be all these different things. But I will tell you that I noticed all of a sudden that they were getting friskier, right? Like all of them were just flirting more, you know, doing more of the spinning and dancing and headbutting and all that stuff, turning the you know, white color when they, you know, if you have seahorses, you know what I'm talking about. They were doing the courting behavior, right? And then all of a sudden I did a water change, and like the next 2 days, nothing. Like they were staying away from each other. I'm like, what's going on? And I realized that when I did water change, my pump had broken. Usually I make water in, you know, 5-gallon buckets, use a pump, put the water and salt in, and then, you know, let it mix for, I don't know, an hour or so while I'm cleaning the tank, right? I set up the water, get it spinning, and then I clean the tank, and then I put the water in. Well, my pump broke. So I was literally using distilled waters because I need to get a new filter for my RDI. So I bought distilled waters, and I was putting the salt into these gallon jugs of water and just shaking it like crazy, right? You know, for as long as I could, feel like it's mixed up. And so basically, long story short, the salinity was too high. So I go to check it. It was at like, what is it, like, I'm thinking 0.3. Is it 0.3? I'm sorry. I'm getting myself
like a
off.
1.03 something.
Yeah. Instead of
the 1.026.
Yeah,
What percentage of the water did you change?
only about, I mean, I would say about 20%, maybe. I mean, it was
20%?
yeah.
Still, that's enough to make the salinity go up somewhat, and going up is bad, going down is okay.
So, and tell me why it's bad. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say is they acted unhappy, and I did.
They just can't. I don't know the proper explanation for it. Dan would be the better one to explain that. But I know it's bad to go up in salinity in a hurry. You can go up slowly. If you want to change your salinity and go higher, for instance, if I was at 24 and wanted to go to 26, I would probably do it over about 3 or 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
They may be able to handle it over 2 days for that little bit, but I would do it 4 just to be sure. If I wanted to take it down, say from 2.4 down to 20, I could do it right away and wouldn't bother them at all.
Gotcha. Well, no, and that's what I noticed too, is that I've gone and that's what kind of why I was asking you, Ray, is because I've gone and noticed them being really frisky, and then the salinity I figure out is really low because I've topped off too much or whatever. You know, I've removed uneaten food and I've just topped off, and then, you know, not ever made the exchange with the salt. Like I just didn't worry about it. I just topped off. And they seem absolutely fine when it goes down like that. But yeah, like I said, they were very unhappy. I could tell. I'm like, what's going on with you guys? And I just happened to test.
They're like, it's too salty in here, Mom.
Salty. And that was really interesting, though, to me to see how much they disliked it because, you know, most reef tanks are what, 0.025 or 1.025? Isn't that usually the reef?
Reef tank, well, all my reef tanks were 2.6.
Yeah, 2.6 is what I usually hear.
With a seahorse, though, well, even other fish can be stressed with an increase. Just they're not as sensitive to it as a seahorse is. But the whole reason that we know going down isn't a problem is because we can take them out of their display tank, put them into 12-minute freshwater dip, and they're okay.
Right. And that's
if you
isn't wait. That's unique to seahorses too, though, right? Like
no.
So no,
you can do. Well, I used to do freshwater dips on my tanks.
Okay. All right.
When they had the
Well, so at least we're making the point. Obviously, I didn't do it on purpose, but I'm glad we've made the point. If you're keeping seahorses, just realize that they are more sensitive to salinity going up quickly. And I'm proof of that. Now, Ray, should I be like, so what I did is I realized, like I said, a day or two later, oh, this is really salty. It's at 1.03, God. And so what I did is I just did like a little minor water change and like maybe 5 gallons, if that, and just used straight fresh water or straight distilled water. And then like after a few hours I tested and I was back at like 3 and I was like golden, all right? And they're acting fine. But should I watch for anything? Like if we've talked about repeatedly, you don't want, it's the same with temperature. You don't want the temperature to go up drastically very quickly. If it goes down drastically, that's not as big of a problem. But if it goes up drastically really quickly, that's bad. So if it was temperature, I'd be worried and I'd be watching them. But with salinity, is it just they're unhappy when it's really salty and then they're fine? Or should I watch is what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Well, I would say I don't know how long ago you did this, but if it's gone by 3 or 4 days now and you don't see anything, you're probably over the hill on that.
Okay, good. And we are. And it was like last week that I realized I did it and fixed it, and they've been fine for days. So yeah, I just wondered. And I see you, Zen Ginger, and I see you, Cora Works. Hello, hello. Don't forget open chat. I know, Zen, you're getting closer to starting your tank, I hope. So you got to ask any questions you can think of. I know you have asked questions that I've said I'll get back to you, and then I don't. Ask them again because I forget, busy life. But anyways, so yeah, I guess I've resolved the issue. It has been days, so I'm not going to super worry. They're back to acting frisky again. And I'm going to start playing with some stuff too. We've talked again before about how I really want them to have fry, but I'm actually not prepared for it. So they're probably helping me out by not having the fry.
Yeah, maybe they know.
I miss having the fry. I miss raising the baby so much that I just want to do it again. And when I was doing it, it was labor intense, but I just loved it. I miss doing it. I really want to do it again. I know we've talked about different things. You guys have given me different suggestions. And then again, I get too busy and I don't get the stuff done, which sucks. But I still have the other tank running. I could do some swip swapping. But I think what I'm going to start with is trying some live foods. I found a few resources online. I'm going to try some live feeds, enriched live feeds, see if that gets them hopping and humping, hopping and humping, and go from there. And Dan has told me a few, like Ray was mentioning, some temperature tricks, right? Making them think it's a certain season. And I also wonder if the salinity does that too. Because, yeah, but I'm saying also, like, wouldn't salinity do that too? Wouldn't it make them think it's a certain time of year because the water's saltier, or no?
Changes, I think, influence fish, I've been told. Lucy Arowana told me that about my freshwater fish, and I imagine it might apply to saltwater fish as well. But she said, specifically in my case, it was colder water that I put in my freshwater tank. Okay. And she said that could influence them to spawn. But we're talking different fish, but I imagine, and I think I've heard that changes of any kind can influence that behavior.
And all I was really asking is, like, and Ray, maybe what I'm asking is absolutely changes affect their behavior. What I'm asking is what would promote spawning?
Yeah.
Colder water. I knew that one. Mm-hmm. So messing with the temperature. Live feed sometimes induces them to breed. And I just wondered if salinity was something like that, because in the ocean, if you think about it, during certain times of the year, it would be higher salinity. In certain areas, it's higher salinity. So does that affect it, or do we just not know?
Considering they live in estuaries normally, you would think after winter, probably salinity's going down because more fresh water coming in from the snow melt and rivers being full, that kind of thing is my thoughts on that.
Right. And that's what I'm saying is I bet you that the reason they're getting friskier now is because I did lower it, right? And they think that oh, okay, we're out of this bad salty time or whatever.
Bad salty time. Yeah, that's what it was. They're just so
There it is.
happy.
It's just like, okay, my skin's no longer burning. Yay. Right.
Yeah, let's have a party.
Right. Well, anyways, I'm playing with different things. I know most of you, when you set up Seahorse tanks, you don't want them to have fry because you don't want that extra responsibility. So maybe this is of no interest to anyone, but if you're ever trying to breed, I'm trying to figure it out in a smaller tank because, like I've said before, when I had seahorses to begin with, it was like I got them. Oh my God, I have fry. Like almost within a couple months, I had fry every time with every species. I think reed-eye was the only one that didn't. Well, no, Barborian reed-eye didn't like instantly give me fry. They were a little pickier about it and such. Most of the fry I ever had was Erectus, so maybe it's the species. Maybe it's who knows? Who knows? It could be nothing. Like Ray said, he had a pair that just never bred. But I've gone through a couple different pairs here, and I still don't have fry. So I'm really coming around to the fact that I think it's the tank. But we'll see. I'm still playing with it. Hey, Bonnie wanted to know, do any of you use an algae scrubber? Anyone want to go first? You guys know I do. So
Yeah, I do
Just
not.
in one of my tanks. One of my tanks.
what, Ray?
I built one to put in one of my tanks, one of the 40 gallons that had a pair of, I can't get the word out. Your favorite
Reed-eye?
seahorse. Your favorite seahorse.
Barbori.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's right behind me here.
And is the algae scrubber in there?
Yeah.
But we can't. You probably can't turn it to show us.
No.
So you just it.
Pardon? It's a homemade one.
Yeah. How? Like, what is it? A specific shape? Like, what did you
It's
do?
rectangular in shape. I made it with. I don't know if in the States you have the same thing, but here, if you go to Walmart, their meat is in plastic trays, black plastic trays, like Hamburg.
Mhm.
And so I took two of the largest sizes that they had. And normally I wouldn't buy from Walmart any meat, but this time I bought it just to get those plastic trays. And they're the largest size they have. And then I had some, I'm not sure what you call it. It's a plastic mesh.
Like knitting.
That you take wool or cotton or something, you put it through.
Like for
Anyway.
needlepoint, maybe.
Well, it's the screens.
I made
Yeah.
a frame on that out of rigid airline tube, not flexible, but the rigid stuff, and made it so that the rigid airline, I poked the one end in two holes at the bottom and let it go down a little bit so that could move the top end in and then move them up. So two holes at the top. And it was tight enough that it would stay there. The holes were tight enough it would hold that plastic there, so I could move it back up and they wouldn't fall down. And then on the outside of the tank, I put the other tray on there, and I put LED lighting on the outside, shining through the glass on that screen on the inside of it. So this is set up on the end glass of a 20-gallon tall.
Gotcha.
And I had an airline hooked up to pump some air into it, but it wasn't working as well as I liked. So I switched that and I put a mini power head that actually came free in Instant Ocean salt buckets many years ago. And
yeah, they don't give us that stuff anymore. Go ahead.
Anyway, I hooked that up and put some plastic tubing on the output and directed that to the bottom of this of the scrubber, and so it directed a stronger flow across that mesh, and then it worked much better.
Nice. And so, and I'm going to let you help me answer Bonnie's other question in a minute that I put up. But I just wanted to tell you my experience. my experience is kind of similar to Ray, which is never the case, right? You guys know I'm not a DIY person. Cora Works, I saw you said this kind of algae scrubber is really easy to make with those LED strip lights that you cut to length, right? But I'm not good with DIY. I always screw it up somehow. But I had a very good friend named Ronald Chinners, who's in many of the Facebook groups, but he made me this algae scrubber for my 65-gallon tank. And Bonnie, I still use it. But the way mine works, I can't turn it around to show you. I'm literally looking at it. I've actually got a video out there. If Zen Ginger, anybody, if they don't have time, I'll find it later and post it. But I go through exactly how this scrubber is built and how it works. But basically, it's a really unique design. So my tank was not drilled, so I had to use an overflow box on this 65-gallon tank. And so it's this vacuum-looking tube, right? It looks like a vacuum cleaner tube. Anyways, this not rigid vacuum cleaner tube goes from the overflow box to the top of this algae scrubber, so it goes straight into the algae scrubber, right? And it has like a drip tray with holes in it where it can put like mesh to catch any big stuff so it doesn't go directly into the scrubber. And then it was like this triangle design, right? So there's plastic that goes like this, and then the mesh pieces for me sat right like this. And then obviously, so I'm sorry, I'm not doing a very good job of describing it. So it's this big box that goes in the sump, right? The vacuum thing comes down into the middle. There's a drip tray that has floss, catches any big stuff that comes straight from the tank, and then it drips onto the inside of this box where there's this mesh sitting there. So there was two sides, and what I really liked about it was that, there's that time when you harvest, when you clean the scrubber, and then you put it back, and then it kind of takes a minute to get going. Or if you let it get too overgrown, then that causes problems too. So having two of them was really nice because I could, clean one week, clean one the next week, and always have that algae growing and working for me, right? I don't know. That's the only algae scrubber I've ever used. I added that algae scrubber with sump onto my very first Seahorse tank, and it did a miraculous job of getting rid of nuisance algae. Now, to go on to, and there are a lot of really easy to make or really convenient to buy scrubbers these days. I like them a lot. I think they do work. To answer your question about does it keep algae from growing in the tank, I would say if you try to DIY it or use one like mine, I have had situations where because it wasn't contained, right, then algae from the scrubber, if I didn't clean it fast enough, then that would get back up into the tank and then cause problems in the tank. So you have to maintain, and Ray, I'm gonna let you talk in just a second, I promise, but you have to keep it contained. I really do like scrubbers though. And I've actually had multiple tanks that had what I call pretty macros or tank macros in the tank. So like blue scroll, like red grape, like the rose, like I had those pretty macros in the tank, and I just didn't want the green hair algae type stuff in the tank. So I used the scrubber in the sump and it worked perfectly. It did keep nuisance algae out of my tank as long as you keep it maintained. That's the key. If you're not harvesting, you're not removing the nutrients or the nitrates or whatever. And if you're not harvesting, it will end up clumping and ending up back into your tank. Ray, what were you going to say about scrubbers real quick?
I just found that the white light that I had put in originally in there, it was a white LED. And I thought maybe the intensity wasn't good enough for it, but I don't remember what the intensity was now. I think it was the equivalent of a 100-watt incandescent. But when I was doing some research into it on the internet, somewhere I found someone that said red light works better. So I changed and I got a red light LED, and it did make a difference.
Right. The red light absolutely works for that nuisance algae. That's why you don't want a lot of red over your tank. Like, don't want any. But then you throw that on the sump on a scrubber or something, and man, or a refugium, they love that red light. Totally agree, Ray. And I would say that's the only thing I didn't like about the design of my algae scrubber is because this DIY one that he made for me was really excellent, solved the problem, but it also had these two huge like black box LED lights that had to sit on the outside of the sump in order to put the light onto both of the sides, right? You got to watch the video to really get it, get what I'm saying. I'm not going to be able to describe it very well, but those lights had to be pressed up to the side, and it just, it was a pain. When they went out, I had to buy new ones, and I think the strips would have been a much more convenient option. So if you're making one, definitely look into that. But I mean, would you say it did help? I know, Ray, that you made the comment. I thought I put it up.
I only lit one side. Like
You only
made one. This plastic tray. I made some channels on the inside of the glass that I glued down there with silicone, and I could take this whole tray assembly and just slide it down into those channels and take it out at any time. So when I set that mesh in that tray, there was no light going to come at it from the backside because it's black plastic. So I only lit from the outside of that end plate there. So I was lighting just one side. I personally don't think it's necessary to for that type of a scrubber to light both sides.
You wouldn't light both sides of one piece of mesh, right? But remember, in the design of mine, there's two. There's two separate pieces of mesh, two separate sides. I'll have to pull up the video if I can in a little bit and show you. Like, if you can't see it, I know I'm going like this, and you guys are like, what the heck? Okay, right? It's a box, but it has plastic that holds two mesh like this. So there's one mesh here, one mesh here, and the light comes at it from both sides because it's two different pieces. And the whole idea behind that was that you never don't have algae growing, right? You never pull the screen and completely clean it off and put it back in and have to not really start over, but there's that phase where when you have a clean piece of mesh, it takes a minute for it to start to work. That's why you always scrub them to get them rugged and, so they'll catch the algae, right?
I just never cleaned the one. I never cleaned it totally at the time.
Ever?
Never.
Wow.
Most times I would clean about 2/3 of it, sometimes only half. And then the next time I would clean what I didn't clean the first time.
Right. So again, the only difference is in my case, in the design he gave me, it's just I take one mesh and then the other. It's the same theory. It's just going about it a different way, right? I mean,
more cumbersome to deal with.
I mean, I thought it was pretty easy because it wasn't hard to take care of. But I get what you're saying. To each their own. And you did say, Ray, that paying attention to husbandry and feeding protocols is the best resistance to tank algae. Right. But then again, let's be fair. Who has ever had a tank that didn't go through an algae cycle? And new tanks always do. I've never, maybe you have, Ray, but I've never had a tank that did not go through some green, ugly hair algae phase, right?
I've never on a Seahorse tank had hair algae on it.
Jeez. I mean,
I get algae growing on the glass, and that's it.
Holly, are you with me, or did yours never have it either?
No, I've always had algae of some kind or another. I have to deal with coralline algae on my display tank because I used to have rocks. And it had spread, onto the tank, and now I can't get rid of it. But I always have in this tank. I have this film algae that I can't get off. I changed the lighting, and I'm getting it a little at a time. But the back of the tank, where the light was sitting right above it, was horrible, and it's getting better now that light is gone. But no, I always have some kind of algae, all different kinds.
Real quick, Zen, if you are looking for it, I mean, don't spend a lot of time. I can find it later. But it was in the macroalgae series. That was like 2 or 3 videos. I think it was I feel like it was number 2. when I go through showing the scrubber, but it's not labeled scrubber. It's labeled macroalgae series. If you can find it, cool. If not, no big deal. I will find it later. But Bonnie wants to know. So really, she's asking, and we've kind of told you a couple of different opinions. And with the algae in the tank, I would just say Ray's been doing this a really long time. He has Seahorse tanks figured out. Getting the best equipment and then planning your feeding protocols and your husbandry is the key, like he said. But I just would not beat yourself up if you do see your tank go. Like I just feel like every new tank, reef tank or any, goes through that algae cycle, right? I mean, it's supposed to, is it not? I mean, like that, to me, that's just crazy to say it wouldn't. And I'm talking like new. When you first set up a tank, it goes through the nitrogen cycle, right? You got to get that set up. And then it goes through the algae cycle, is my understanding, or that's what's always happened to me. So if it happens to you, don't like go crazy and think you failed. It will gradually come out of it. It will go away. But providing better maintenance, husbandry, and equipment is the key. So Bonnie wants to know, she's getting equipment for the new tank. She hasn't decided in a manufacturer of a tank yet, but getting there, doing research on equipment. So let's talk about that. What is the equipment that you advise for a Seahorse tank? Like the must-haves?
To me, a protein skimmer.
Right, Holly, you go first.
I'll say
Okay,
I'll volunteer a protein skimmer.
What else? I mean, like, walk me through, like, if you were setting up a tank, what is the equipment you would buy? Like A, B, C, D.
Well, tank
must have.
For me, I mean, everybody's different, but for me, the tank, of course, a sump. I need a heater and a chiller because of where I live. So you got to take into account, I think, your climate to figure out if you need those things or not. You might not where you live. A skimmer, and basically that's the only equipment that I use. The pumps, of course. So I'm not that fancy, really. I don't have algae scrubbers or UV lights or anything else like that.
But for you, the other thing other point I want to make in this is I'm not just talking about equipment for mechanical filtration. I'm talking about the biofiltration too. So you are someone who doesn't use rocks in the tank anymore.
No, so I use K1 media and bio balls. And I have the Robert King chambers, but I didn't always have them, and I don't really consider them a must by any means.
Really?
There's something extra I added.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, so
Ray,
for me, it's bio balls, which are they're old fashioned, but that's how I learned because I've been in the fish hobby for a long time. So
absolutely. Ray, if you were setting up a tank today, what equipment would be your must-haves for bio and mechanical filtration?
A tank and a sump.
That's it?
That's must-have. Mm-hmm. Like everybody talks about skimmer, and I agree, skimmer is a great aid, but most of my Seahorse tanks have never had a skimmer on them.
Really?
Yeah.
So you just did massive water changes. That's it.
Well, yeah. Well, I did that even with the skimmer, but I had one skimmer on a 40-gallon tank, and I had the main skimmer on the 90-gallon tank, but all the rest of the 40s and the 55 and the 65, they had no skimmer. And but I did use on another 40, I used a reactor with carbon in it.
Mm-hmm.
I posted there on YouTube. It's my thought that it's not so much having the best equipment. It's a case of using what you have to the best of its capabilities. Mm-hmm. But to do that, you have to understand what the needs of the Seahorse are. Mm-hmm.
And what would you go ahead and say what you think the needs are?
Well, the main need is that water quality, and to keep dissolved organics under control because the dissolved organics are related to the problems that seahorses have for the most part.
Well, but the other key thing that they need is the feeding, right? That's your very strong opinion that they need multiple feedings at separate times to stay healthy, correct?
But that's comes under the part about understanding their needs.
Right. I
Okay,
was just trying to get
that's not something you're buying in order
right.
to be prepared for your tanks.
Right.
You should learn what you need beforehand, but if you have them and don't know it all, then you can learn. And people have succeeded many times with far less uh, feeding protocols than what I believe is necessary. But I think
And
it
with
matters.
far less.
See,
Go
it
ahead. Sorry.
matters too. If some people get a pair of seahorses, or maybe even four, they'll buy them from a supplier, and they do lots of things that I wouldn't think of doing, and they succeed. Okay.
Right.
Now, seahorses are like people. Some people never ever get sick, and some
Yep.
people are always sick, and a lot fall in between. Unfortunately, in my experience, seahorses fall at the lower end of the scale, but there are some at that upper end. So
Yes.
if you happen to be doing a lot of things wrong and you're still succeeding, I believe then you've won that luck of the draw, and you have seahorses that are just
Have
capable of dealing with the things you're doing. Most of us, when we get seahorses, it's not always going to be like that.
right.
And
And that's why I try to really hard for us to talk about this, because everything Ray just said is absolutely correct. You win the lucky drawing and get these seahorses that are just resilient to everything, and you could do many things that other people couldn't. But on this show, that's why I try really hard to be like, okay, let's talk about if you get average seahorses. And one of the key things is to buy from a reputable breeder, right? Or someone you trust. Like I trusted Vincent, I trusted Holly. I have their seahorses, and they're very strong. They're putting up with all the stuff that I do wrong, right? But back to the question, sorry. In this case, when you're asking what equipment would you do if you started a tank today, right? And I would absolutely go for the safer side. I know that like Vincent has tanks with literally too many seahorses in it because he had so many bred or so many born and grow up and do fantastic. And all he uses are the Robert King char chambers. That's it. That's all he has in the tanks. And he does massive water changes. And you can pull that off. I, on the other hand, am lazy. I don't like doing massive water changes. I will if I need to. I do what I need to do. I do the water changes, but I don't want to do 90% water changes every other day or every week. That just is too much for me with my schedule. So if I was setting up a tank tomorrow, I would absolutely get an overrated skimmer. Okay, let me start over. First, the tank, as everyone has said, right? I would make sure I had at least 30 gallons per pair of seahorses. As you get bigger, that number dwindles. Like if you have a 100-gallon tank, you don't have to stick to the 30-gallon per pair rule, right? The more water you have, the more you get to play with it. Then I would add a sump for more water volume, right? And because it can hold the other equipment. I still like rocks in my tank, but I use rock that I've had for years. I have, recycled, bleached, recycled, make sure there's nothing in it, no phosphates coming back to me, no live rock, none of that, right? It's all rock that it's either man-made rock or it's rock that I have used and bleached and sat out and dried and then recycled. We can talk about that too if anybody needs to know how to recycle. I think we have a video on that. But anyways, but I don't even think of the rock in the tank as my biomedia, if that makes sense, right? I know the reef keepers out there are like, well, the rock and the sand are what make the tank work. It's what controls the nitrogen cycle. Seahorse keepers in general, I'll say, because it just does depend. But in fact, I'll just say personally, I don't even look at the rock as my biofiltration. It's there for me, for aquascaping, for pretties, right? That's it. And then in other tanks, I've done no rock, right? Because I'd rather have a more artificial look, like Holly does. But so the rocks in there just for me. Equipment wise, I would absolutely get an overrated skimmer. The recommendation is 2 times the tank volume. So if you're running a 60-gallon tank, let's say 30-gallon tank with a sump water volume equals 60 gallons somehow, then you want a skimmer rated for 120 gallons. I know Ray has said, and I just said, Vincent doesn't, I don't think Vincent uses a skimmer. I would absolutely use a skimmer, because if it's somebody new to seahorse keeping, or new to seahorse keeping, or me, I'm not new, but I'm lazy, right? If you don't want to do the extra work, the skimmer does really seriously help. I will say, hang on back skimmers, I've never found one that works efficiently. I don't like the one in the all-in-one. So if we're talking skimmer, you probably do need the sump. And then, of course, as Holly mentioned, she didn't really go into it, but that K1 media, when Dan started using it and he told the rest of us about it, it's what everybody uses, except for Ray. Sorry. But everybody else uses it. And it can be as easy. You can buy a reactor or whatnot. But in my tank, I literally have a 1 liter bottle that I inverted, use an airline, and just spin that K1 media. It's so good for a tank. Look up K1 media in an aquarium. Everybody's done it. I mean, even the king of DIY, Joey, I met him a couple times too, but he uses K1 in multiple tanks. So K1's a big thing, and you can make your own reactor. Let me see what else. I like algae scrubbers. I would not say it's a must. I would say it depends on the tank you're setting up. So I think that I like the algae scrubber on a tank where I've got macros in the tank, and I'm trying to keep nuisance algae from growing on those macros, and on a tank where I have gorgonians and stuff like that, where I'm just really worried about nuisance algae, because you add pretty macros, they could bring in nuisance algae, right? So I always like the scrubber in the sump of that tank so that it would basically gather the nuisance algae down there so that it wouldn't grow in the tank. But I wouldn't say a scrubber's a must. Another thing that I have not tried, but I would if I was setting up a tank tomorrow, is the little, you guys are going to have to help me with the name, but it's the toilet paper looking thing. It looks like a paper towel roller.
Oh, yeah, the mat that instead of a filter sock, right? That
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, only because I think it would be more efficient and easier to use than a filter sock, because that in my tanks I use filter socks. But if I was starting a new
they're
tank,
really expensive though. I think I looked at them recently, and that's like if you have a big budget to me.
Right. I'm just saying I would love to try one. I think they'd be great for a seahorse tank, but as Holly said, they're really quite expensive. And the other thing I would say, Cora Works said, yeah, and that's another difference, like between Holly and I, is I don't use heaters or chillers. I don't use anything. I use my air conditioning. That's it. I mean, it's efficient because I'm in Indiana, and it doesn't get, my air conditioning works. But you guys know I've done a video on bacterial infections in seahorses, because I did have a time in the 10 years I've lived in my home where my air conditioning went out. I was not here, the temperature spiked, and I had all sorts of problems. So, again, it's the risk you're willing to take. I'm not willing to spend a lot of money for chillers and heaters when my air conditioning has only failed once in 10 years. But when it failed, it sucked, right? So it's really up to what you're
Yeah, I have
risk.
an HVAC that doesn't work anymore. It needs to be replaced. It's like 12,000. So I run chillers. They're a lot cheaper than the $12,000 HVAC system.
Right. Exactly. Like you said, we're talking about it to begin with. It depends on where you live. I'm in Indiana.
Yeah.
So we don't get that hot. I mean, very rarely. And my AC controls it, and I'm able to pay the bill. So it just depends on, risk tolerance level, like we always talk about. And Ray, you said you think Vince was raised because the other piece of equipment, I disagree with Holly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if I was setting up a tank tomorrow, I would absolutely get a Robert King char chamber. I really like the aqua char, and I really like just the way that it works as a system, and the seahorses love it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have mine in tank, and the seahorses sleep on it with bubbles going up their tails. We'll just say tails. So that's something I would put in my must-have list, or, you know, if you can afford, I guess. Those aren't expensive, but I'm just saying, like, I would get a skimmer before a Robert King chamber.
Mm-hmm.
But if I could do both, I would do both. Absolutely. So K1, skimmer, Robert King chamber, and then I use, as I said, rock for just decoration, not for filtration. It's working as filtration still, I know. But that's why I don't feel the need to have sand and all that other stuff for filtration means, because in my case, sand has always caused me problems. Anytime I do have nuisance algae in a tank, it's usually coming from the dang sand. I swear. And I rinse it and I do all the steps. I just have always had trouble with sand. I don't know. And Ray, I know open-ended airlines produce bubbles for them to play in. Again,
and I really do like, I forgot to mention too, the quick filters. I like them too.
And say, what's a quick filter?
That's what I use.
Okay.
It's a filter that attaches to a power head, basically. It's like it's a sponge filter inside of a chamber. Kind of like I use like Ray's idea. I use like kitchen scour pads wrapped around the thing that goes in the middle. The aqua clear one is what I got.
And it just literally is filtering before it goes into the pump, right? Or into the thing.
Yeah,
and
it just
pull it off
sticks in that chamber, and then you can empty it out and rinse off the pads. So it's just another thing, like having an extra filter sock maybe inside the tank, similar to that.
Catching it before it goes over the overflow to the filter sock.
Mm-hmm.
The advantage is that you can reach in, pull this thing off, take it, clean it, stick it back on in no time at all.
Yep. And see, and that's the real key. That's why it's so hard to make like an article, what you need for a seahorse tank. Because half the time you don't know what you need until you get to know your seahorses. Oh, they're really healthy seahorses. I don't have to do a lot of craziness. I still have to take care of them in their tank, but I don't need that extra stuff. Or, oh, I have seahorses that are going to get sick really easily or whatnot, whatever. And also you get your tank set up, and then you figure out, I don't like the way this is going, so I'm going to add this, or I'm going to make this to add. I'm going to add another filter sock, or I'm going to use a quick filter, or I'm going to, there's endless
You learn
things.
new stuff as you go along. I didn't start with everything that I named.
Right. My first seahorse tank, you guys, was a 29-gallon. It wasn't even 30 gallons. 29-gallon tank that I put rock in, no sand, but I put a bunch of rock, a bunch of macros. It's the one that was in the magazine, and it was very pretty. And I added 4 seahorses. Okay, so I didn't know everything when I started either. And I did lose one quite early, a male. He got pouch emphysema because it was a 29-gallon tank with 4 seahorses, and I had the macros doing a bunch of the work, and I had the rock doing a bunch of work, but there was no skimmer, no sump, none of that stuff. And like I said, that's when I added on the sump with the Ronald Chinner's algae scrubber and a big old skimmer and everything. And then that tank lasted me for many more years. Then when they started breeding, I added more tanks, bigger tanks, etc. But when I started, I did everything not right, and I just had to figure it out as it went. Yeah.
I started with a little hang-on back skimmer on my 55-gallon, and that little cup would fill so fast.
Right.
Because it wasn't.
So I think the overall consensus that we've come to is really seriously, if you K1 is like a game changer in my opinion.
Mhm.
Look into K1, skimmer, overrated skimmer, and then the other things are give and take what you want to do. You need some sort of mechanical filtration like a sock or like the Rolly thing that I want to try so bad, but it's really expensive. But you need something to catch the big stuff. On my algae scrubber, I had that, right? Because it was just made to have that in there. So that worked out for me. But you can also make things for your own tank once you get it set up, right? You'll figure out, oh, the way this tank works, it would be really cool to do this here. And you just kind of go with flow. But I would say skimmer K1 or some sort of biofiltration. You can still use rock. You can absolutely. You can use rock and sand and make it work. It's just I don't know why. Why do you guys think that the Seahorse community got so away from that?
Away from
Anybody?
what?
From rock.
Using rock.
Well, first of
Well,
all, rocks tend to make the seahorses go dark.
that's true. That's
And
true too.
also, a lot of people would get rock and end up with problems. And it was probably because they didn't sterilize the rock and then restart the aquarium and seed it for the bacteria then. And the rock is just like anything else. You can introduce a fish, you can introduce mackerel, and there's always that possibility that there's going to be something on that you're going to introduce to that tank, and it's always going to be there. And so some people felt that rock was introducing more than what anything else was. And then they wouldn't put any rock in, and they turn around and they'll go out, buy some algae or something, throw it in without
Same difference, right?
Mhm.
I know, kind of silly
Mhm.
because there's always risk no matter what you add for sure. With rock though, the big thing with me that I hated was aptasia. If you try using live rock, there's such a good chance there's going to be aptasia on it, and it won't kill them, but it can hurt them pretty badly, and it's just not good, right?
Bristle
Um,
worms.
bristle worms, and in my reef tank. I had my reef tank going for over a year. It was a mixed reef. This is not seahorses, but it was a mixed reef. And until I met Cruz Arias and he helped me with filtration and stuff, I didn't realize I had this huge rock in the center of my reef tank that was leaching phosphates. I mean, I was never going to get control of the algae in this mixed reef because I didn't understand that this rock was just putting out phosphates left and right and causing algae to occur. And so when I finally pulled that rock, got water quality under control, but I pulled the rock, bleached it, dried it, recycled it myself with ammonia, and then put it back in. I never had problems again. It was amazing. So that I guess that you're right, Ray. That's the main reason. Why did people get away from sand, do you think?
mainly because the sand will build up too much crap inside, and as it
Yep.
rots, it's going to definitely increase the DO levels. So unless you're going to keep that sand vacuumed all the time to keep that crap from decaying in there, then it just adds to the problems. That's why
Sure.
I personally prefer bare bottom, even though sand looks nicer or substrate looks nicer. It's a fact that I'm lazy, and I know laziness kills seahorses.
Right. Absolutely. You know that tank now where there's like a bottom that looks like sand. They have these
Oh,
tanks now, and
Like,
the fake sand,
Mhm.
kind of cool. And I've had tanks with sand. I have. It's just that, like Ray was saying, every time I had a sanded tank, I ended up with problems. Like whether in my reed-eye tank, I really wanted the reed-eye tank to be natural looking. It was all rock. Didn't even have a sump in that reed-eye tank. Rock, sand, natural. I was going for the ecosystem, and we've talked about this before. There's a lot to it, phyto and all the other stuff that goes into the microfauna. I mean, you can do this for sure. You can make it work. In my case, lazy again, and I didn't keep up with feeding the whole ecosystem. So then all of a sudden I had this awful, god awful black hair algae growing out of the sand. How do you get rid of, and it was like, I still want it diagnosed what it was. Nobody ever told me what it was. It looked like freshwater black hair algae, but it was like silky soft. So you try to remove it and it would just break apart and go everywhere. I mean, it was a headache and a half. It was endless. There was no way to get it out of the sand.
Wasn't it cyano?
No, I wish I had a picture ready. I'll have to find one and post one. It was like this. It was silky. If you touched it, it fell apart into multiple pieces. But it looked as it, in the flow, it looked like black hairs, black gunks of black hair sticking up from the sand. It was awful, awful. I ended up removing the sand. Is what happened because I couldn't fix it. Because anytime I tried to remove it, vacuum or not, it's breaking up and the particles are going everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was. So, anyways, back to the point. I don't think there's anything wrong with someone wanting a natural tank and doing sand and rock and doing it the old-fashioned way. Just be ready to deal with some of the issues that might come along. The reason that most of us have gone to bare bottom and more artificial or K1 media is because I don't like relying on rock and sand for something, because if there is a problem and you have to remove it, then you're screwed. In my 65-gallon, before I added the sump and the scrubber and all that, I had an aptasia problem. Somehow I added a rock that had it, or added something, macro gorgonian something, that had an aptasia on it, and it covered the tank. And I needed to pull that stuff in order to treat it, to get the aptasia off, because it was a really bad infestation. It wasn't like it was one where you could try to deal with it. It was like everywhere all of a sudden. And I was afraid to pull the rock because that was my filtration, right? So I had to do it in a third of the tank, pull that rock, treat it, put it back. And then, of course, aptasia spreads. So who knows if it, I ended up using peppermint shrimp to fix that tank, by the way. I know I'm rambling, I'm sorry. But I'm just telling you, relying on rock and sand in the Seahorse tank, I would say if you can avoid doing that, do that. Like use K1, use something, even if it's just as backup. Even if you want a natural tank, have a K1 reactor or something working for you in the background would be my advice. All right, I'm done rambling. Bonnie also asked, crazy question, how do you store prepared salt water? And do you have to use RODI water? Do you have to use RODI water? Thinking of getting a system under the sink. Thoughts, guys?
Well, I have my system is in my laundry room, because I have a laundry room sink there. And so I have it sitting on the counter actually next to that sink. And I like having the RODI. Honestly, I didn't start with one. I think I got my RODI system when I was about 2 years in. And what I was actually using was tap water with dechlorinator, the bottles where you put the drops in. That's what I started with. And yeah, now for the last few years, I've had the RODI system. And yeah, it sits in my laundry room next to the sink in there. You do have to change stuff out, canisters and things on those sometimes. So just make sure wherever you put it, whether it's under the sink or wherever you put it, that you can get to it easily is what I would say about that.
I want Ray to answer too. And I know there's a second part to the question, but let's go through each part, like through all three of us. And I want to say too, Bonnie, I'm just letting you know, when I first started looking into RODI and such, I went to like Culligan Man, right? And I just want to make clear, not to you, but to anybody watching, that the systems that they put under your sink for your water are not the same thing. That it's not the same. When you get an RODI system and you're running water for the fish tank, it's literal filters, and then you end up using a TDS stick to make sure that's how you know whether or not your filters need adjusted, unless you get one of the kinds that show you. But I didn't. Mine does not show me, and I use a TDS meter to actually test the total dissolved solids. And if it gets like above 5 or something, then I know I need to change my filters. But I'm just saying the ones under the sink are not usually the same thing. You still have like water softener treatments and stuff that you wouldn't want ending up in your tank. Ray, what's your thoughts on RODI?
I use it.
Okay,
I have a five.
that's it.
I have a 5-way RODI, and I can't think of the name on it right now, but it was a standard marine one that was being sold many years ago and still is. But I can't pull the name out of my skull right now. But it's
Mine
Well, and
bulk reef supply. I have a 5-stage also.
it's-
at mine.
this was bulk reef supply I'd never even heard of when I bought this.
Mhm.
right, this is a little older, but I would say too that it's not like you have to go to an aquarium store. I got mine a lot cheaper from a place called Pure Water. I think it's purewater.com.
Mhm.
It's just I'm just making the differentiation between the underwater or the under sink systems that are treating your tap water because they use softeners and stuff that you wouldn't want in your tank. Whereas I'll put up a link when I find it. I'm pretty sure it was purewater.com, but I'll look it up. I did get mine a lot cheaper by going that route, but it actually is for a fish tank. You just want one that's for a fish tank, right? The other thing
one company and another with the resins that get used. If you don't have
you're right.
sufficient resins, see, it also depends on the quality of the water that you're dealing with.
I was gonna say it. Go ahead.
People,
Go ahead, Ray.
like me, using Great Lakes water, I get a lot of mileage out of my cartridges. I had a friend who lives in the country using well water, and he probably have to change the cartridges every 3 or 4 weeks. It was that bad.
Yep. So that you can do, Bonnie, and I did this myself, is you can request a report from your water company. You can request a report of everything in your water and showing your TDS, total dissolved solids. What Ray's saying is exactly the truth because I live in Indiana, and where I live, I'm in a small town. So our water company it's literally pulling water from the next town. And I don't know anything about tunnels and why certain water's bad or any of that. But my TDS of my tap water is 400, which is ridiculous, like insane.
Yeah.
It is so bad. You don't even drink it. It's so bad, right? So I need an under the sink filtration, but I don't. We just don't drink it. And then I totally use either distilled water or my RODI system for my tank, because if I tried to do a tank with my tap water, it would be an absolute disaster.
And see, my TDS runs 30 out of the tap, and that's high to me. Like most of the time, it's like 20 something.
So now you know the difference. Hers is 20 to 30, mine's 400. So request a report from your water company just to find out what your TDS is. Like in my report that I got, it was saying that there was like arsenic and stuff in my water. I'm like, oh my Lord. Oh,
most people are going to have impurities like that in their water.
Yeah, but geez, I mean, come on, it's scary. And anyways, the point is you can request and then you can determine, because if your water's not that bad, like, I mean, you really could try for just using something like Prime and tap water. I personally would suggest using RODI, or in my case, because I've come down to only 2 tanks now, I only have 2 tanks and they're not huge, I'm using a lot of times. If I don't want to redo the filter so soon, I will just buy distilled water from the grocery store, which isn't cheap anymore either, but it works in a pinch, right? So and then the second part of her question was, how do you store your prepared salt water?
All over my house. No, I what I use is 5-gallon buckets, and I have, at any given time, I have usually 2 on hand that are the RODI water with no salt in it, because I don't salt mine till I'm pretty much ready to use it. And then I have usually 1 to 2 buckets of salt water ready to go for when I'm siphoning or if I have an emergency. And then once a week on the weekend, I make water for the water change. And then I have 2 tanks that I do 20-gallon water changes on. So then I have 40 gallons in these buckets stacked in my library. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how I do it.
Gotcha. Ray?
Well, obviously, I like to store because of the amounts I have. And after I do water changes in the tanks, then I mix it up and it sits there to the next week. And there's no problem. I keep power heads in it. I also had an airline running in it too, open-ended. And this is one of the containers was 35 gallons. The other one was 30 gallons. And so I'd use those up every week.
Is there I've asked, and Bonnie, this is actually a really good question. I've asked it myself because I used to, when I had tanks all over my house, like in every room except for the girls' bedroom. No joke. I literally had tanks in every room, including the kitchen, which is not good. Don't put your tank in your kitchen. Anyways, when I had multiple tanks, I had a 30-gallon brute tote or brute, garbage can type
Yeah.
that I bought, and I would fill it with RODI water, do the salt, make sure the salinity was right, and then I would store it for I guess only for a week because I'd use it all in all the tanks. Now, like Holly, I just use 5-gallon buckets and I literally make it on demand. I don't store water anymore, but I've always wondered how long you could store water. Like and here's why I asked, because I know if you're using when I use the 30-gallon brute trash can, I had a pump at the bottom. When I got the water where I wanted it salinity wise, I would just let it sit and run. And I would keep the pump running until I used the water. I never let it just sit, right? It was always churning. When I try to do that in a 5-gallon bucket, I'm using too big of a pump or something, but it heats the water up. The water ends up warm because it's constantly being pumped through. And then, also in the 5-gallon buckets, I just seem to notice that like dust or what, I even put a lid over it, but I don't hold water anymore because it just became such a problem for me. And Ray, you said you could hold water forever.
Well, I've never ever kept any forever. I have had water that, in addition to these 2 containers, because of the amount of water changes in all the tanks that I had, the 65 gallons wasn't sufficient for me to handle the weekend's water changes. But I don't know, I probably got 30 or 40 instant ocean salt buckets. Some of them just the 5-gallon sizes, and a lot of them are the 6-gallon size that they used to use. And I would, after I mixed up the salt and it set for a day, then I would pump it into all these pails. And I've had scads of these pails full of water too. I've had a situation one time where I don't know for sure how long, but there was inadvertently I shoved a couple pails into a corner, moved other stuff in front of it, and I don't know for sure how long it was there. I know it was over a year. And
Wow.
when I pulled it out, I checked specific gravity. It hadn't actually changed because the lids on the instant ocean buckets really sealed tight.
Oh, wow.
And I used it, never saw any problem.
No kidding. See, well, maybe it's that. I mean, let me turn my camera
There
back
was
on.
no aeration or anything in the buckets.
That's crazy to me. I would not have used it. And and the thing is though, it might just be my family, right? I have teenagers. So that, there's just stuff everywhere. But I've never, even with a lid, and I wasn't sealing the lids, I was just putting the lid on, but I wasn't sealing it. Maybe that was my problem. But I always had, first of all, it would end up, there would just be stuff at the bottom of it, right? Like, I don't know where it came from. There was a lid on it, but there would be stuff at the bottom, and that would make me uneasy from using the water. And if I didn't keep it churning, then my house, humidity is a bitch here. Okay. So lid or no lid, it was going to evaporate, period. I'm telling you, I don't care how tight the lid was. So I guess, again, it depends on where you live. I would say, I mean, I don't know. I've seen people store water for a long time, like Ray was saying. I just never did.
I don't have
You can end
to
up,
store a
you
lot
can
of
end up with
water.
a precipitate if there's nothing to keep it in motion. Well, sometimes there's a precipitate that happens just through temperature change and so on, even if you do have a power head or aeration in there. And most of that, if it does happen, it's minor, and you can stir it around and redissolve it. If not, just use the water without what's there, and it's not usually it's not going to be enough of a problem that whatever the precipitate is, it's usually a calcium one, and it's not going to be something that's going to affect your seahorses at all.
That's so interesting to me. And any reefers out there, I'd be curious what your thoughts are, because like Devin, Reef Dudes, he has big storage containers, right? I mean, people are storing salt water for a long time, but
Yeah.
I feel like they keep it mixing. I feel like that's a part of it, right? So it doesn't build
And
up.
see, I
And I
only
feel like,
add salt really when I'm ready to use the water. I have lots of buckets of water sometimes. Like when I'm getting ready for the water change, I have RODI water sitting around for like 4 days, but it doesn't have the salt in it. Like I'll put the salt in it the morning that I'm going to do the water change. So it's only in there a couple hours. And I actually mix by hand in the 5-gallon buckets. I just stick my arm in there and literally use my hand to stir it, and it dissolves within like seconds. And then right before I use it for the tanks, I reach in again to see if there's any particles at the bottom that didn't. And usually there's not. It's usually
that's
ready.
well, when I had my experience this last week where I was using jugs of water and salt, it didn't work out for me, Holly. It was shaking the shit. And literally when I did notice too, remember I told you guys it ended up with me having high salinity.
Yeah.
And I measured, like I always do, I measured it right. I don't know, I didn't really understand, but I will tell you, when I was pouring it into the tank, I did notice that at the end of the pour, there was this thicker looking water that had salt that wasn't dissolved.
Huh. You were using gallon jugs, though. That's a little different, I think. That's a small amount.
And the water was very cool because I'd left it in my car. So maybe colder water, I don't know. But either way, Zen Ginger wanted to know, Kelly and Ray, were you cleaning the buckets in between each use so there was no chance of contaminants that could grow things in the meantime once they were covered? Fantastic question. Ray, you go first.
I never even had covers on the garbage pails. I only used covers on the pails, and that was mainly because I was stacking the pails. So I put the lid on it, and also the lid I put on tight because I filled them right to the brim. And when I put the lid on, the water would squish out a bit.
Yeah, but you guys, I remember Dan talking about set a cup of water on the counter. Come back in 2 days. Would you drink that water? I mean, I remember him saying that. I don't remember the science behind it, but bacteria grows. So I would say if you're going to store water, here's number one. If you're going to store water, make sure there is a lid so no light is getting in, because then your question about things growing, what grows things? Light,
Yeah.
right? Also sealing it in, hopefully that's keeping it contained. I personally think you have to keep it churning. Airline, Powerhead, something. I'll look up the science later. I'll try to, or we can talk about it next week some more. But I remember there's a reason why I keep it churning. I don't know what it is, but I remember there's a reason. And then third, to your actual question, do you clean the buckets in between? So here's what I was just thinking as we're talking about this. The big 30-gallon Brute trash can was brown. So I just realized, and it was deep, right?
Mhm.
So I wouldn't see the things that I see now in these little 5-gallon, and I'm using the salt buckets like Ray was talking.
Yeah, I
I'm
use the
using
salt
refill
buckets
buckets,
is what I use for my storage. The instant
but
buckets.
it's really quite disgusting. If I make water and I don't use it all, and then I leave it churning with the power head until last week when it broke, and then I come back a day or two later and I'm like, oh, I could use this as top off. No, I can't because oh god, I'm getting a phone call. No, I can't because there's always stuff at the bottom of it. It's always looks dirty and yucky, and I don't know if that's just my house,
I don't
but
think mine
so
lasts long enough to get dirty, like I said, because I go through about a bucket and a half every day from my siphoning because I feed them so many times, 2 tanks. So pretty much all the water I make in a day I use. And then when I'm doing the actual water changes, I make that water right before I use it. So I don't ever have salt water sitting around for a long time. The RODI water, about 4 days sometimes, like because I'll make
I
it
think
before the water change, but it's covered in the instant ocean buckets is what I use for that. So it's covered up during that time.
so I think that's really really good advice, Holly, is to just hi, Chris. I think that's really, really fantastic advice to actually store the water, but then not add the salt until the last minute. Because I think the salt's what's doing it. And it does depend on the type of
Mhm.
salt you use, right? So I don't know the answer to that. But I think that's really good thought. And to answer your final questions, then, yes, in between each cleaning, I do clean it. And if I start noticing scuffs in the bucket, right? Because Dan talks about that all the time when he's talking about hatching artemia or any kind of that kind of situation. The reason that you have to be careful with these plastic bottles that we make ourselves is because once you get nicks in the side, that's where the bacteria grows. So if I get a bucket that I start noticing when I'm cleaning it, oh wow, there's all these scratches in it from whatever, the pump or whatever, then I'm tossing that one and getting a new one because that's where the bacteria grows. Ray, did you ever clean the bucket in between?
Uh, I posted that in my garbage pails, uh, just at a guess, it might have been every 2 years or so, I'd clean them because they precipitate calcium. You get a brown calcium deposit on the sides of the container. And so when I used the water, before I mixed up new water in it, then I would take a hammer and bang on the sides in there for the calcium to break off and fall in the bottom, then dump it upside down into a box to get the calcium out of it, and then refill it. And as far as the pails go, uh, all I did with them is if I noticed that there was dirt in the bottom or something, then when the pail was emptied, uh, I'd rinse it out, do it over again.
Well, and Ray, I saw you said you must have been lucky for decades. Right. Again, guys, risk tolerance. I'm very careful with that kind of stuff, right? I don't want to do the work. I don't want to have to like clean a lot. But if I can make the water cleaner or use equipment to make the tank cleaner, that's what I'm going to do. And
These pails I've had for over 30 years. So I got to believe there's got to be scratches on the inside of them.
and
I
right, I
never
get it.
clean my buckets. If I notice one starting to look off color and I don't like it, I just switch it out for a new salt bucket. I have
Hey,
so many.
Zen,
I got stacks of them.
we clean our buckets. Me and you, we clean our buckets, right? All right. Anyways, Shyla did say I only mix water that I'm going to use for the day or the following day,
Mhm.
but you stay right. Shyla's where, Holly? Isn't she
Singapore.
in? Where's she?
Singapore.
Yeah, Singapore. So, and we want to know how the babies are doing, Shyla.
Yeah.
We sang happy birthday to them too last week. We need some of those. It's Whitey Eye, right? That
Yeah.
she's got.
Mhm.
Man, we're gonna have to figure out shipment from Singapore to Indiana. Guys, my coworker is calling needing help, and I see Chris Clark out there wanting help with seahorses. I know. But any other questions before we close it down for the night? It's been fun. I mean, we've talked about a lot of different stuff. I don't always have the answer, right? But I can tell you my experience. And Zen, I can't wait till you get seahorses set up. And we're going to work with you every step of the way. And you're going to do fabulous. Have no worries. And I did see, oh, that's the comment I forgot to post. Hang on. Somewhere she told me about her husband, and I forgot to post it.
Oh, yeah. Working on the house, not the seahorses.
Trying to find it. I'm trying.
Maybe
Okay.
she can trade them in on a new one.
No, don't say that. I wanted to start it 2 weeks ago, but hubby's acting like it's not a priority and doing silly stuff like fixing plumbing. What the hell, plumbing when we've got seahorse tanks coming? No, hubby, no. No, totally lame, but I get it. He's smart. We should let the husband do what he needs to do to fix the house first, make that safe. But we're here for you when you're ready, right? We're excited. You're excited. We'll wait on hubby though to fix the house. Absolutely. But for tonight, guys, I got to call work back. Sorry, but we're going to end it, and we'll be back next week for all your questions and all your seahorse chat, right? Everybody say Happy Wine Wednesday. Oh, and I did send Ray his plaque. He'll be showing us in a week or two whenever he gets it in Canada. But for tonight, Happy Wine Wednesday. Cheers, Holly.
Cheers.